All right. Hello, everyone. I'm Jason Fierno here representing the Mining Mavericks. Today, I'm fortunate enough to have Mr. Jim Spenceley on the line with us. Jim, how you doing, man?
Doing well, Jason. Great to have the chance to talk to you today.
Yeah, appreciate that for sure. So, for those who don't know, the Mining Mavericks are a curated group of industry leaders who are passionate about making the industry better and more sustainable for everyone. Jim is currently the SVP of mining at Black and Veatch, and Jim shares this passion. So, Jim, let's go back a few years. You graduated from the University of Waterloo with a chemical engineering degree, and then out of college, as I understand it, you went to the contractor side of the equation.
Yeah, I started my journey with fluor actually, fluor mining, which was awesome. Um, Got me into the mining sector. I can tell you a whole story about how my first engagement in mining went. But as usual, it's like, hey, can you come down and help us solve this problem? Which was actually at BHP Minera Escondida.
Okay.
And then it was, well, you're a handy guy to have around. Can you stay and look at some other things? And then next thing you know, you're doing international work, and it was great. Fluor's an awesome company, and was awesome training there.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think in that era, there are probably a little bit more resources to develop and mentor and train their employees than now. I know they're trying. Don't get me wrong. I'm not criticizing them, but I think when you would have started, they had a lot of programs that helped develop people. Is that accurate?
Yeah, absolutely. There was one that still to this day I remember, which was project risk management, and it was awesome. It's taught by all the top engineers and project managers and commercial people in the company, and it was all about risk,
Mm.
which is what's important at the end of the day, making sure we manage the risk the best way for the project. And there was a lot of mega projects going on at that time too, almost a decade of continuous mega projects all over the world. And you know, these days, there might be a handful of them going on at any one time.
Yeah,
And
no,
we've lost some good people to retirement in the business, that's for sure.
I totally agree. Actually, that's one of the things that I really wanted to chat with you about, which is, you know, what what do we do? Recognizing, as an industry, what do we do to develop the next generation of leaders, recognizing that we've got mass exodus, I guess, or at least a lot of folks are off into retirement or, just doing one-off consulting and stuff like that. But there's a huge vacuum in the industry. Just curious what your thoughts are on that.
Yeah, it's a really tough problem. I would, well, I think everybody in senior management needs to have a focus on people development. It needs to be part of their job, and they need to be committed to it. That's, you know, obviously we've got diversity, equity, and inclusion, which is a huge focus area right now, but we still have to make sure that, yes, we're doing DE&I properly, but we're also doing basic talent management, talent development, good succession planning, identifying talent, creating opportunities. Everybody has to be doing that across the board. And we have to create an exciting environment for people to want to work in mining too. It's cyclical, it's not easy. Mining doesn't have necessarily the best brand with society. The SME, Society of Mining Engineers, they have a foundation program,
Hmm.
which I know a lot of the major miners invest in. Some of the consulting groups support that. We definitely support that at Black and Veatch, because that's all about creating a future really around the mining engineering side of the business, for making sure we have, the operations can keep going. But there's also, SME's got an education program, part of the Mineral Education Coalition. It's called Moving Mining, around creating that positive image of mining in society. And let's definitely come back to mining in society, because that's something that needs a lot of work too. But I think it's personal commitment from people in positions where they can have an impact,
Hmm.
and cross training, pulling people, from industries that are adjacent, let's say heavy industrial, where they could be cross trained. I think the people that are going into the consulting side of things at the tail end of their career are we're gonna need those people for sure. I see a lot of them are on boards right now, guiding companies, which is great. But I think active participation there. But it's going to be a journey, and I think it's just one we all have to stay committed to.
Yeah, just one tactical thing. I'm getting some delay on my video, so hopefully audio is coming through okay. But just apologize to folks if they aren't able to see the video well. But stay tuned for the audio nonetheless, because I know there's a lot that Jim brings to the table and offers the industry. So apologies for anybody that's dealing with that. The other quick piece that I wanted to say is that you've also worked with SNC Lavalin and Newmont in addition to Fluor and Black & Veatch. So you've been on both sides of the coin, if you will, between a contractor and an owner, which I think gives you a unique perspective. What do you think about that, being on both sides or having that exposure and experience?
It's invaluable, honestly, because when you're developing a mine as an owner, you're responsible for everything. I mean, absolutely everything. The business case, the community relations, the permitting, interfacing with government, regulators, developing the mine, getting the business ready, all of that, in addition to what a contractor typically sees, which is building infrastructure, building the mine, designing the processing facilities, power, water, processing, the mine development, all of that. But really, that's what a contractor sees isn't the full scope of what an owner sees. And a contractor's got a completely different perspective on it. I mean, first and foremost, contractor needs to, provide safe, quality execution, make a profit, support the client's needs. But he's driven by, they're there to make money and deliver value to the client. And I'm sure most of my peers in the contracting world would definitely want to do a good job and have repeat business from our clients. But the owner's job is about, it's about delivering the business case. So it's a completely different perspective, and he's relying on the contractors to partner, create a partnering environment, and all work together, because there'll be many contractors working on a job to deliver the project. And I think that's one of the fundamental differences on the owner side. You've got to pick the right partners. And that's not always about, the lowest dollar. You've got to get the right people. You've got to have safety. You've got to have quality. And you need all these contractors working together, like oars in a boat, all pulling in the same direction. That's quite a difficult thing to accomplish. And any good owner's project director will know how important the teamwork is on a job. So I've been very fortunate to have had almost 12 years at Newmont, worked around the world almost exclusively in project development. All my contracting experience has been on the development side too. And what that allows me to do is, I got trained really in Fluor, went over to Newmont, really got trained there on the owner side. Now coming back to Black & Veatch, I can help really make sure that we understand what the clients are looking for and make sure that they get the right value for it. So it's good. It's a lot of fun.
Well, I think it's a unique perspective and not experience that everyone has. But at the same time, I think it's worthwhile to have a bit of a discussion about it. If I relate that to the contracting space, the prime contracting space, what we talk about often is that owners don't necessarily understand contractors. I think contractors understand owners to an extent, maybe a little bit better than owners do. But not only is it just a different organization and different risks, it's a different business model. And what a contractor needs to get out of a contract versus what an owner needs to get out of a project and a contract associated with that are really totally different fundamentally. Yes, you've got to focus on safety, the environment, social, and all of that stuff together for sure. But the differences in the business model, I think aren't as well understood as maybe they could be within the industry. I don't know if you agree with that or have a different perspective, but that's the way I see things.
Yeah, I do. And sometimes, sometimes, a lot of times, the people that are managing projects on the owner side come from the contracting world, which is really, really good. But the more time you spend in that world, you kind of get niched into just the suite of contractors that you're dealing with for your specific like types of work or geographies, which are very different.
Sure.
And sometimes you don't see what's maybe things that are evolving trend-wise in other areas. One of the things that's a bugaboo for me is the quality of scopes of work. That's a challenge on the contractor side. And really what contractors need to do is partner with the owner and help them get the scopes right. But that requires a level of trust on the owner's side that's not always granted.
Right.
So I think that's an area where, you know, there could be more trust there. It'll drive better outcomes. One of the other things too is I think once there's a clear scope of work, and then you can bid it, and then you can negotiate a contract. I mean, like in the contracting world, the contract drives all the behaviors on a job. So you've got to get that right. Sometimes owners get frustrated with, you know, a contractor nitpicking terms and conditions, but that's very important because that's how contractors manage risk, and getting that risk sharing right in the terms and conditions. Each contracting entity will have its own set of internal governance things that they need to have for their own risk management, which may mean that they can't accept a limit of liability beyond a certain point.
Sure.
Or LDs or consequential damages, you know, those big type ticket items, they always get a lot of scrutiny. But once we get a scope of work and terms and conditions that are good, and they have to be good, because if they're not good, then you're going to have all kinds of issues behaviorally managing the job. But if those are done right, there's a lot of quality contractors that can, you know, perform well. What I find is really tough is getting to the point where you've got a quality scope. And that goes back into FEL 1 and 2A, I really think, which is options framing, selecting the right frame to evaluate whatever the business objective is, selecting the right alternatives, whittling them down to the preferred few, and then to the recommended single option. To me, that is the hardest part. And if you take somebody from the contractor side, a lot of times they move them into the owner's environment. A lot of times they don't have any experience with that. They just said, well, give me a scope of work to bid on. Well, that's easy. It's, well, what is the right scope and how do you even get there? And we've all got stories of projects that have merrily been going along, spending lots and lots of money developing the wrong scope. It's suboptimal, and then the project gets recycled. So I think there's a lot of opportunity in getting owners and contractors to work together to better shape that project. But again, it kind of requires a lot of trust. Contractors can bring a lot to the table to help with options evaluation, but they're not going to be experts on framing things necessarily inside the business environment of a miner. And that's where the miner needs to bring the right expertise. I think there's been a lot of progress on that. But that's, to me, is one of the big challenge areas. And especially when you look at what's happening with, let's say, the higher ESG and social performance requirements. We get the new tailing standard out. We have to use less water. We got to use less energy. We got to work towards carbon neutrality. We've got to have better environmental performance. And you got all these other pressures. We've got that in a context of declining grades across the world. So a declining grade means you need more energy and you need more water in a conventional mining environment to do what you need to do. The processing technology hasn't really changed. You know, the heap leach, you know, concentrating minerals, those technologies haven't changed, but it's these other factors that are changing. And there's, you know, unless you look at new technologies and look at different ways of doing business, you're never going to really get to where we need to get to. So to me, all of these factors just require, you know, better partnering, and especially at that front end. So I know it's kind of a long-winded answer, but well, you know, there's a lot of room for improvement, I think, about how contractors engage with owners when the scope is fuzzy and helping them get to the right scope, and how owners can partner with contractors to help get the most out of the contractor, to help them select the right scope. And that requires more trust. And I think we need to have more partnering going on, and, you know, bringing in the best SMEs from around the world to help shape these solutions.
Yeah, no, I mean, what you're describing, Jim, and what you're talking about, I mean, definitely hits home for me. I mean, I've made a career out of trying to come up with a high quality scope of work that makes sense for the owner, makes sense for the contractor, and then a appropriate risk profile that drives the right behavior. So that's our bread and butter. So maybe more tactically, what are some of the things that you think we can do as an industry in FEL1, FEL2A to enhance the scope? To your point, how do we get better scopes? I know trust and partnering for sure, but are you suggesting that contractors get embedded sooner, or you use one contractor to help you develop a scope and then they're excluded from bidding? You know, what are your thoughts there?
Yeah, I think, you know, it kind of, there's different ways to tackle this problem. I think, let me comment on from the owner side and the contractor side.
Sure.
I think on the owner side, you know, take like a major, like a Rio or a Newmont. I can't really comment on Valley because I haven't worked with them in that zone.
Sure.
But, you know, the majors, you know, BHP, they've got really robust processes. You know, there's a process for opportunity framing. There's a process for how to do FEL2A. They all call it different things. They have guidelines that they can give the contractors, and they've got a very conscientious training and development plan for developing their people to like do, you know, who do you bring in to actually even facilitate an opportunity framing workshop? And they'll go in, they'll bring external people in, they'll engage contractors at FEL1 to help with that. So I think there's varying levels of maturity in the majors, but I think the majors are going the right way so that they've got the right processes and the right people managing that on the owner side. And they are engaging, I think, more and more contractors on FEL1. Mm-hmm. They're almost always going to the market for FEL2A, but it's the FEL1 where a lot of, you know, times they say, well, we're not ready to go to the contractor. So I think getting more contractor engagement in FEL1, and I think there always needs to be an option to bid at every stage, right? So you got FEL1, you got 2A, you got 2B, you got 3 now, and then you got 4. So yes, when you bid and change horses, there's a time factor, but certain contractors maybe have different skills that are better suited to early stage versus later stage. So always having the door open to bid the work and making that clear. And if the contractor performs well, rolling somebody from FEL1 to 2A makes a lot of sense. That's not a good spot really to change. But when you're going from 2A to 2B and you've got a single recommended option, that's not necessarily a bad place to change. So I think that earlier engagement tactically is one thing. Another thing too is these, you know, let's go to the mid tiers. The mid tiers have far less experience doing this. And then and maybe they don't have the resources to put all these programs in place, develop guidelines. So then you're more dependent on the people you pick on the team to make sure that those things go right, or maybe some people that can be brought in, but maybe they don't have an external value assurance program, for example, or they don't have somebody coaching them on scope development. That's an area where I think on those types of projects, and also I would lump in, you know, major capital for a mining major goes through the full, you know, that full value assurance process and stage and gate with all the processes layered onto it. But if it's smaller capital that's managed at the site level, or you've got a mining company that has a decentralized model, then those projects don't see that, or maybe don't benefit from that. Maybe it's a $25 million project that's under that threshold, but it's a critical project. Maybe it's a water treatment plant, or it's a key pilot program for some, you know, hydrogen fuel cell haul trucks or something like that. those types of projects sometimes fall through the cracks necessarily and don't get that support that they need. So I think that's one thing the miners need to look at is how do they ensure that they've got the right coaching in that opportunity framing and FEL 2A stage, and don't be afraid to spend a little bit of money to bring a contractor in. It's got to be the right one.
Yeah, of course.
It needs to be technology agnostic and have all the right skills to help partner with you on the opportunity framing and the options evaluation, because that's when you shape the scope. That's when you either miss an option and get something suboptimal. You got to go back and reframe it. We've all got those stories. So I think those are the key things. I would say, Jason, is making sure that you bring the contractor in early and making sure you got the right people on the job on the owner's side who can make sure they're getting what they need out of those early stage studies.
Yeah, sure.
Not an easy solution, I mean, because it is really tough to get that right.
No, it is, but I agree in a large part about early engagement, in FEL 1, and if they're doing a good job bringing them into 2A. I think I really agree with you that switching horses at 2A can be an optimal position to do that, or even into 3 a little bit later. But I think 2A into 2B is probably my preference, because from my vantage point, the contractors that are good at FEL 1 and 2A aren't necessarily the folks that are going to build it or have a construction focus. And I think that that's good, that you've got a focus on a study and a focus on a project. And I think that's really where you transition as you go from 2B into feasibility. You're really talking about a project in my mind. The other thing I wanted to ask you, Jim, is one of the things that me and some other industry leaders were talking about the other day is that we're seeing a lot of the investment assurance, value assurance, those types of functions get assimilated into the business. And as a result, it's not independent. What are your thoughts there? What are you seeing?
Yeah. One of the benefits I've got sitting on the contractor side again, and I was extensively involved in these types of processes at Newmont, is I get to see how the various miners do this.
Right.
And there's a lot of differences. I think fundamentally everybody's kind of settled in on FEL 1, 2A, 2B, 3, though that they've got different guidelines around those things. The estimating guidelines are interesting ones quite often, and I just as a side comment, there's a lot of lack of, let's say, consistency on what, like for capital cost estimating.
Oh, sure, yeah.
About what is a class, what's in a class 5, what's in a class 4, what's in a class 3. But anyway, that's a sidebar. It is getting better over time as we get more cross pollination. But the independence one is a really interesting one. It's expensive to run a value assurance process. You do need to have that independence. I would say what I see, let's say in the mid tiers, they don't really have that formal value assurance structure. It's more done with certain key management individuals reviewing things and using that kind of a process. The majors all have their own process. Sometimes they use, let's say, peer review approach, where they'll pick people from a different part of the organization and bring them in. I see that a lot. We definitely see independent people selected and brought on to teams. We see that quite a bit. But it's kind of hard. You have to have somebody in that value assurance process who's an expert at the company's business model and knows their AFE process really, really well.
Sure.
To guide and manage the independence. So it's kind of a mixed bag, I would say. It's hard to do well. And I see tweaking all the time, because you've probably got examples just like I do, and there's lots of them out there, even today with the world's best mining companies, where they've had this formal process, they've had independence, and there's still problems. There's lots of examples about that where maybe there was a fundamental technical issue, or maybe there was a cost blowout, or maybe the schedule wasn't optimized. So I think it's still a work in progress, and I think there's still improvements to be made. But I think the independence is key, and getting the right people looking at the project that can kick the tires and make sure that the risk, that all the risk aspects are being managed and flushed out and properly dealt with. So I don't think industry's quite got it 100% right yet, and I'm pretty sure everybody would probably agree with that.
I agree with that. I think you summarize it really well in terms of what the majors have, what the mid tiers, how they handle it, and some of the challenges associated with it. To me, I'd like to see a bit more independence, and what the trend seems to be is to be more in-house with it. And it just seems like, the fox guard and the hen house. And I think as an industry, we don't kill projects enough. We let them go too far and spend too much money, when perhaps if you had another lens that didn't have the organizational bias or pressure, there may be some projects that actually get killed that should get killed.
Yeah, I agree. It's interesting to watch. You like, let's say, take the developer world, for example. So let's say instead of a miner building a mine, it's a developer building a mine, which happens sometimes, but a lot of times developers don't build mines, but they'll build infrastructure projects. So how do they do it?
Sure.
Well, they always like the EPC model because that's a transfer of risk and gives them cost and schedule certainty. Mm-hmm. But what do they have? They have a fully independent they have an independent engineer that works for the financing organization, whatever that is.
Yep.
Financiers engineer, and that's always a pure independent team, multidisciplinary, that's there to represent the financier's interest on the job. So they'll have one of those.
Yep.
Then there'll be an owner's engineer, which will be separate from the EPC, working on behalf of the owner, again, multidisciplinary, managing the EPC or multiple EPCs, managing that full spectrum of the job. And then you'll have the EPCs. So there's probably some good lessons in that model that can be brought in. But again, it's there has to be a willingness to spend a little bit of money on that independent view. And it doesn't actually have to cost a lot of money, because there's a lot of great companies that are expert independent engineers and that are totally geared to doing that and see all these things from a whole variety of perspectives and can help with that. Anyway,
I think it's money well spent. It blows my mind. Something that I've been saying recently is, if you look at capital outlay from at least the majors, about half of their spend is on capital projects and development. Yet doesn't get the same love that operations does from the organization, from the market as well. It's just people don't talk about projects very frequently, not in the way that they do, processing or tailings or dry stack, whatever the technology is from an operational standpoint. So little time is spent discussing projects, which absolutely blows my mind. What's your perception of that? Do you find pockets of people talking about doing projects better, or certain organizations that are good at it? I know that the Canadian Institute of Mining puts on a global symposium every year that talks about capital projects, which makes me so happy. But other than that, I don't see a ton of dialogue.
Yeah, I could go on forever on this subject. And maybe we should weave in a little bit about what's happening trend-wise. I mean,
yeah, let's do that.
Mining projects, the processing is the easy part.
Absolutely.
It's not easy. Nothing's easy, but it's easier
to rank it. Yeah, sure.
It's once the resource is defined, mining method is defined, that's a fairly straightforward, there's very straightforward, well-defined processes to get that part right, although we still have problems with dilution and all kinds of other things that you hear in the news all the time. But a lot of times they're infrastructure projects now. I mean, where's the power coming from? Where's the water coming from? How do we do that? How do we manage tailings the best way? And we're in really remote locations, so we got to get road access, and where's the port going, and all of that stuff. And that could be half the capex. And then there's the ESG component, social performance. Those that there's a much higher bar with that now. One of the things that I see a lot is there's a lot of change constantly in mining organizations. Like, and you probably see this too, Jason. Like, tell me one company that's had a static operating model for like 3 years. I don't know. I mean, there are some examples I could give you, but a lot of times there's a lot of change. I mean, they may change the operating model. They may change people within the operating model. Who's making the decisions on commercial versus technical? Are they in the same group? Is it firewalled? And the people are moving around. Of course, it's cyclical. So we see a lot of movement of people. We see movement in the operating models. Like, as a contractor engaging with a client, we put a lot of energy into just staying on top of things, so we know who the decision makers are and how we need to be selling into that organization the right way. But it's pretty dynamic. So that's another challenge too. And then, of course, you layer on the whole, there's not enough good people to go around for these projects. That's another challenge. So I don't think there's any easy solution to this other than, a higher level of trust and working together. And, maybe kind of going back to the FEL 1-2 comment, one of the things that I think causes some problems in FEL 1 and 2A is a lot of times, like you said, there's consultants that are more like advisory consultants that are really good at framing up studies. Mm-hmm. But the missing piece in that is they don't execute the work.
Right.
So are you getting the right execution mindset into the options and into the capex and into the schedule and into the risk matrix, risk and opportunity matrix? That to me is an area that I think does need some improvement. We definitely see this because when projects get transitioned, yeah, go ahead, Jason.
No, I was going to say what we've seen, I totally agree with you. And what we've seen is projects that come out of 2A and move into 2B and 3, there's a 30 to 40% increase on the overarching estimate because there wasn't that construction-led mentality. But that's definitely becoming a trend that we're seeing. Well, Jim,
and this is where I think partnering can come in. Like, let's say, like SRK, Golder, KP, there's a whole bunch of companies that are really good at that front end, mm-hmm. But they're not building the thing. So wouldn't it be nice, why not get a partner with an execution, a full EPCM company into that mix to help? Because a lot of times they say, well, we can do the CapEx, and they can, mm-hmm. but it's not necessarily fully calibrated, tuned in with geography, all those productivity factors that go in there, or what's happening with lead times for equipment. And well, you're dealing with an execution company, they'll have all that data, they can bring it in to bear, but people don't like to partner. I mean, I see a reluctance to partner, but it doesn't need to be that. It doesn't need to be that way. So I think that's one thing we can definitely do. Lower the egos a little bit and see if we can create a partnering environment that's better for our clients and recognize strengths and weaknesses.
Yeah, no,
there's groupthink that groupthink and parochial thinking, that creeps in, and there's a reluctance to change from the incumbent that's been working on that mine for like a decade or 2 decades that knows everything, right?
No,
but then are they bringing in the right fresh thinking? So I think we need to look at striking the right balance there, and it may not be what we've always been used to doing, if you know what I mean.
All right, Jim. Well, look, it's been a fantastic conversation. You're just a breadth of knowledge, and I think that our viewers and our listeners are really going to benefit from the vast array of knowledge that you have in so many different areas. So I'm really excited to ask you a question that we ask all of our panelists, which is, where do you think the industry is going to be in 10 years? One, but then the second part to the question is, where do you want it to be? So I'm really excited to hear your thoughts, because I know that you're a consummate professional, but also a constant learner, and you get deep into the details of many different facets. So I'm really excited personally for myself, but also for our listeners to kind of get your thoughts on that question.
Sure. Yeah, and it's been a pleasure, Jason, as always. It's a great question, actually, because I think the next decade in mining is going to be very exciting, honestly. So where do I think it's going to be, and where would I like it to be? Well, there's a lot of forces coming into play. You know, if you think about it from let's call it a mega trend perspective. So we got the world's population is sitting at about 7.7 billion, 7.8 billion. Where's it going to be in the next decade? Well, we're on a path to 10 billion by 2050. A lot of that growth is going to be in Africa and Asia. And of course, as we all know, that population growth drives metal consumption. There's a great resource on the SME's Mineral Education Coalition page, which is, they call it the mining baby. It's how much minerals and metals does a human consume over that person's lifetime. It's pretty interesting. But we know global population growth is going to drive metals demand, and of course mining with it. Also, we have the clean energy transition, and there's a great report out by the International Energy Agency on just how much metal is going to be required to support the clean energy transition in a kind of a range of scenarios. They've kind of got a range in there, but that's going to put a huge amount of pressure on metals. And then, of course, we got supply chain rationalization. We got there's going to be increased competition for all these resources. It's going to drive all kinds of interesting things in the financing world we talked about. But you put all that together, to me, it's going to mean it means robust commodity prices for the long term. We know copper is basically entering a structural supply deficit. All the international, let's say, stimulus that's going on, inflationary pressures. Gold to me is going to have a new floor. Hard to say what it's going to be, but let's say it's 1,700 plus. Sure. So gold's looking good across the board. All the commodities are looking good, and I think they're going to stay that way. So robust pricing for sure, which is going to mean that miners can invest in the future, and they can do things like improve their sustainability. So we got the new global tailings standard. We have to reimagine tailings. We all know we have to do that. Right. We've got to use less water. We got to use less energy. All those things are going to put, and of course, there's the whole backdrop of better ESG and social performance. So it's going to be complicated and tough for miners, but they're well positioned to do it, and they're going to have the financial strength to do it. So all that's great. So there's going to be, I think, a lot of CapEx investment going on, both for sustaining capital, brownfield expansion, greenfield expansions. Africa at some point in time is going to have to, it's right now the majors are not doing a lot of investment in Africa because of, it's called broad range of geopolitical factors. But Africa is going to have to be a place for a lot of investment in the future. So that's going to be interesting to watch as well. A lot of the Chinese state-owned enterprise mining companies have gone in there and bought up a lot of assets. They've linked it to growth in those countries with infrastructure development. So that whole thing's going to be interesting to watch. One of the things also, BlackRock has got, their sustainable goals for the companies that they're investing in.
Right.
One of the things to me is interesting is mid-tier and junior miners don't necessarily have the quality of assets, or let's say the financial strength or the functional technical depth to do a lot of these programs that need to be done to keep them in pace with what the majors are doing from a sustainability standpoint. One of the concerns I have is, are we going to have a widening gap between juniors and mid-tiers and majors around the quality of sustainable performance and its timing? So that's something that I think we have to keep an eye on, and hopefully the majors will treat. I think we need to treat sustainability like we treat safety. Everybody, it's a kind of a shared value for everything.
Sure.
And I think we need to share best practices and learnings around sustainable best practices across the board, like we do with safety best practices, so that people that don't necessarily have the deep pockets and the huge functions that can, support decarbonization, the juniors and the mid-tiers can benefit from best practices being developed by the majors. That's going to be an area to watch too.
Sure.
So what where I think it's going to go, I think we're going to have a lot of investment. We're going to have sustained commodity prices. We're going to have a really strong focus on, the sustainability side, the decarbonization, better water management, better social performance, better energy management, marching along these decarbonization pathways. And hopefully we have a lot of information sharing, a lot of partnership, a lot of collaboration, a lot of innovation across the entire community, which also means bringing in best practices from outside mining to help the whole industry move forward. And also I would like to see an improved relationship between mining and society. That to me is a little bit of a weak link, because we have to have mining. I've always been part of society, but we don't have a strong relationship. There's still a lot of anti-mining sentiment out there a lot of times, because that's a legacy perspective. People don't understand the quality of work that's being done by majors, how much better it is than it was. But we have to have the metals. We have to have the refineries. We have to have the mines, or we can't move forward as society. So I'd like to see that. That's sort of my aspirational goal, that part does get better.
Can I pause on that? Can I pause on that and ask a question? Because I think it's a really interesting topic, and something that we've talked about within the Mavericks community, and actually in one of the last roundtables, we talked about how mining companies have investor relations. Like, that's a function. How do you deal with the street? How do you deal with government officials? But there's not the traditional marketing department like Coke would have for marketing Coke. Why is that? Why is that? Why are we not out? Because the industry is doing good things. Yes, there's issues, and we've had obviously some horrible things with tailings in Brazil and other areas, but why is it that mining companies don't have a traditional marketing company to get them on football Super Bowl ads and stuff like that? What do you think about that?
Yeah, I think it's a legacy thing, honestly. Miners, I think, want to be low key. Now it's interesting. I don't know if you're watching the NHL playoffs right now, and go Canadians. Really would like.
I married a hockey player, as you know. So.
Yeah, literally, that's going to be phenomenal. I really hope the Islanders get in. But actually, Rio is advertising, not advertising, but they have if you look at the back end of the Bell Center they're there. I was actually surprised. That was great. I think they're doing more of it. Certainly, if you go on to social media, and I follow most of the majors, and because I like to see what they're doing with their social media, they're starting to do more of it. But I think it's a legacy thing, where they don't want to be self-promoting necessarily. It's kind of embedded in the culture, but I think it is changing. I see in the social media that the miners, most of the majors anyway, are promoting their sustainability reports, and their sustainability performance. But there's still some big issues like the Rio Tinto not issue, that the challenge they had in Western Australia, where they included in their mine plan that ancient indigenous site that caused a lot of issue, and they're still working through that. That was a huge brand hit for Rio.
Totally.
There's still a long way to go with things like that. So I think we're gonna see more of it. But yeah, it's just never been, marketing for mining has been selling concentrate, selling their,
No, exactly.
it's all their metal sales.
Exactly. No, I appreciate your thoughts on that. Thanks for letting me derail you a little bit. Just an interesting topic. It's just something that it's an area of opportunity. And when we have conversations like this and we're dissecting issues, it's like, okay, it's one thing to just bitch and complain, but it's another thing to actually, try to develop a potential solution. And I think there's opportunity there personally. So thanks for your
it's good. The Society of Mining Engineer has as part of their mineral education coalition a Move Mining initiative, which is sort of a grassroots initiative around educating youth around the relationship between mining and society. Honestly, it's a generational problem. It's going to take decades to do it, to get it to where people fundamentally understand the relationship between mining and society. We have to, we just have to have the metals to. It's always been there. We just tend to turn a blind eye to it. So I think, it's just something we have to get better at. And where do I think it's going to be in 10 years? I think we're going to have some stumbles along the way for sure. I definitely see the will with our mining clients to really up their game. There's a lot of investment going on in sustainable mining. That's at Black and Beach. Our service offering area is really energy and water sustainability, and helping clients build these facilities to the best standard possible anywhere in the world. And we interact with these technical functional areas quite a bit, and how they've progressed along the way. And like, for example, moving mine closure. Like Rio's got a great program. 10 years out from closure, there needs to be a pre-feasibility study. 5 years out from closure, there needs to be a feasibility study. And those projects get managed in the major projects group so that they're subject to the full rigor of, proper staging gate system around all aspects of that, around that closure. So really great things happening. So I think we're going to see, like I said, a lot of investment going on, a lot of attention to it. I think the performance is going to continue to get better and better. And like I said, one of the things that I've kind of got my eye on is how well can we do the collaboration, innovation, and partnering aspects? Can we build that trust that we need to? And are we going to have a gap form between the majors and the mid-tiers and the juniors around how well they're doing sustainability, their sustainable development, because there's just, like I said, there's a quality of asset, and there's a margin, there's only so much margin to play with on some of these other assets, and then they don't have the deep functional knowledge. But they're when I talk to the mid-tiers and the juniors, they're very committed to sustainable development too.
Do they have the money for it? I mean, I think my experience with a major versus junior, and I know we're talking about mid-tier, is that the juniors are so beholden to the finance companies and the banks to do basically the minimum to get the highest return. Do you think they're gonna have any, do you think the banks are gonna be willing to pitch into that, or at least accept that?
Well, it's a great question, and it kind of leads to the whole concept of, are we pricing sustainability into the commodity prices? And the answer is no, we're not. It's kind of like, is sustainability priced into oil? No, it's not. and look at all the challenges the world had with trying to implement a carbon tax. It's really hard to do. So like a lot of the majors have an internal or shadow carbon tax that they're using for making sure they're looking at decarbonization versus traditional energy source the right way. But I think that's a key issue. If you're getting money from the IFC, for example, International Finance Corp, for an investment in a developing country, you have to work to their equator standards, and a lot of those best practices are embedded in the equator standards and principles. So you're getting that. Are they evolving? That's a great question. I'd love to have a follow-up with IFC and just see what their next version of Equator is going to look like. I'm sure they're working on that. But the question is, can they do it? And a lot of the money right now has to go into figuring out, like, it's easy to put a renewable plant in, like that's easy, and it's actually pretty cost effective. But figuring out a strategy around total decarbonization, like what do you do with the fleet, electrifying the fleet? There's a lot of R&D going on. Now, I don't think the juniors, they really can't participate in that R&D, quite honestly. They can trial things that are coming out, and I see some of that. But I think what really has to happen is the major OEMs and the majors really have to kind of shoulder the load on the R&D side of things and be open to sharing their learnings and best practices with the industry, so that there can be a fast adoption, like a fast follower type of approach, without them having the ability or the resources to participate in that. I think that's probably the solution we're going to see, and hopefully, like I said, hopefully sustainability ends up being like safety. It's just a shared value across the industry, and we want to share all the best practices.
What are you seeing? What's the trend in that? Do you see that that's starting to happen, or do you see that there's resistance, or do you have any insight on that? I understand what you're saying, and I think it's a fantastic idea. When it comes to safety, everybody's like, well, shit, if it benefits and keeps somebody going home to their family, then yeah, obviously we're going to share. So it's a non-issue. Do you see any folks that are kind of leading the charge on that, or?
Well, yeah, there's a few examples of both ends of the spectrum. So one great example of the sharing side of the spectrum is ICMM, which is International Council on Mining and Metals. They've got a cleaner, safer vehicle initiative for cleaner, safer vehicles. And that's a collaboration between miners and OEMs around not only safer vehicles, but also carbon friendly vehicles, like electric, underground electric vehicles, hydrogen fuel cell vehicles, the autonomous vehicles. And that's an open forum, which is great. And the ICMM's been doing work on vehicle safety in an open forum environment with OEMs for a long, long time. And that's led to some really great outcomes. So I think the Cleaner, Safer Vehicle Initiative with ICMM is going to be really, really good. Maybe a different part of the spectrum could be on the digital world. So operational efficiencies, and which every major is looking at managing big data around their mine sites to be more efficient. Like, just, you know how much data comes off a haul truck or a shovel or a drill or the plant. There's a lot of data. It's all being streamed in, captured. There's a lot of artificial intelligence, machine learning algorithms that are being applied to optimize maintenance for haul trucks, optimize movement, optimize electrical efficiency, travel. I mean, all of that stuff. So there's going to be some best practices that come out of that world. I think, there's some cutting edge work that's being done there. Now that's going to be work that evolves out of that space is going to improve sustainable performance, because you can improve your overall operating efficiency, like using less energy per, less kilowatt hours per ton of material processed or mined, using less water per ton of material. There's going to be sustainable performance improvements that come out of managing the digital side of a mine better. But that's also going to be a lot of IP tied up in that, and let's call it a all-in cost advantage. So that could be the other end of the spectrum, where that kind of information might be more difficult to share because there's a lot of investment tied up in that. But they'll definitely, so what I kind of see in that space, there'll be some best practices that come out of that. There'll be some learnings that could maybe be decoupled from the IP and shared. That could be a little bit tougher, and there'll be probably a lag on that. So those are kind of some bookends maybe for how the data sharing could go, and then of course there'll be everything in between. But certainly I think there's a recognition that sharing best practices is going to be good for everybody at the end of the day.
Yeah, it's an interesting concept. I like it. What I see, and maybe I'm just missing the point, but what I do see is that companies are looking at things like their ESG ranking, and they're using that as a market differentiator, so that the street looks at them and says, oh, they're a company that's doing the right thing. We're going to give them an uptick. So the question is, are they willing to open kimono a bit and share that knowledge and that information? So it's an interesting angle to think about. Well, if you look at it the same way as safety, it's not about being a differentiator, it's about doing the right thing. So I think it's going to be interesting to see how that plays out.
Yeah, if I give you another example,
definitely,
mine closure. So how we manage water at a mine site is a big deal, as you know, and we have to treat for discharge in a water positive environment. And a lot of times we use reverse osmosis systems, which typically have, let's call it a 40% reject rate. So for every cubic meter of water you put in, you can take 60% and clean it up to discharge quality, but 40% of it gets concentrated and is recycled back into the system. And then over time, you accumulate a lot of, let's call it brine in the system, that when you go into closure, you've got this load of water in the system, which is closed, that needs to be treated. So this is an area where, let's call it the old school brute force method of treating that would be a thermal evaporation system, call it. Okay. And then you could produce some stream of hazardous waste, some stream of non-hazardous waste, which gets treated differently. That's a very expensive approach. There's all kinds of emerging technology that can achieve the same outcome, lower cost. And there's a lot of research going on in this space right now. And that's another example where there's going to be a lot of intellectual property generated, some with the miners, some with the OEMs.
Yeah.
It's a little easier for a miner to share IP than probably an OEM, because that's their competitive advantage.
Right.
But I think in the area of mine closure and brine water treatment, that's another example where I think there's a huge opportunity for sharing information and testing, because these technologies have to get piloted. Like hydrogen vehicles have to get piloted. So the learnings from these pilots, if they could be open source, that could be an aspirational goal too, where we can do the piloting and share the data.
And maybe that's where the mid-tiers come in. Maybe they have the right set of circumstances at a mine site to run some of those kind of guinea pig trials, with some input from the OEMs, just having the opportunity to run their theories, their technologies in the real world. I don't know, just something to I guess ponder.
And I think the ICMM can play a role here. The ICMM membership is really majors for the most part. There's some major mid-tiers in there, but let's say it's majors for the most part in their membership. But ICMM isn't about promoting the interests of mining for the majors. It's about it's managing it's managing mining globally for everybody. That's part of their mission. I didn't probably say that exactly the right way, but you get the intent. So I know, you know, if the ICMM takes an active interest in sharing the information and making sure that we don't get a gap forming in some of these spaces with the majors and mid-tiers, I think that'll go a long way.
Got it. Yeah, no, makes sense. Makes sense. Okay. Anything more on that you want to share with us? I don't want to cut you short, but I also want to respect your time.
No, I appreciate it. I mean, it's a great subject area. It's going to, like I said, all in all, it's exciting times. I think it's going to be, this next decade is going to be an unbelievable time to be in mining. We got we got a lot of challenges, especially on the people side of things, as we got a lot of huge amount of talent exiting and retiring when things are just getting harder and harder. Like as I like to say, all the easy problems have been solved.
Right. No,
not all of them, but most. So a lot of tough problems left, and a lot of pressures, complex array of challenges for the industry, but it's going to be very exciting. So I appreciate having the chance to chat with you about it today, Jason.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I've got two more questions for you if you got a minute, which is if what do you think about being proactive in generating excitement about the mining industry and getting new talent in and getting our kids talking about, you know, potential career in mining and stuff like that? I mean, I've said it to everybody. If, you know, I've got a truckload of kids, and if I wasn't in the industry, my kids wouldn't know, they wouldn't be able to spell mining, you know? So what are your thoughts on what we can do proactively to encourage top talent to, you know, join us and be part of the industry? What are your thoughts there?
Yeah, it kind of goes back to this relationship between mining and society, in my humble opinion anyway. I think, and it's hard because if you made a comment about mining and marketing, right? And you know, we're not Pepsi. Pepsi's got this huge marketing department.
Right.
You know, I was doing some volunteer work for SME around this moving mining. And if you think about how much money would the mining industry need to spend to move the needle on societal perception of mining, it would be a massive, massive amount of money. It's not even really within the realm of possibility to, you know, let's say the ICMM forms a marketing wing, and like the Gold Council does, right? And they manage the brand of the industry. It's not really doable. There's not enough money. It'd be hugely expensive to do that. Also, I don't think it helps when certain people in government, you know, put an anti-mining, you know, have anti-mining rhetoric, which is definitely out there too. So I think it's, like I said, it's a generational problem. I think we've got to have a recognition in government that we have to have mining in society, and we've got to support it. You know, we can't just say, oh, we're only going to allow mining. We're not going to allow mining in North America. Well, Canada's a mining friendly country. There's a lot of mining in the US, but it's hard to permit a mine in the States.
Sure is.
And people are happy to consume the copper, but they don't really want to mine locally. So we have to kind of get over that whole perception of mining is bad. And in engineering, there's a lot of engineers who think that mining is bad. I mean, people say coal mining is bad. Well, if you look at the amount of revenue, if you look at all the revenue generated from all the metals sold in the world and compare it with the amount of revenue generated from all the coal that is sold in the world, coal sales dwarf metal sales. And a lot of that coal is metallurgical coal. So I agree that we have got to wean ourselves off thermal coal. We don't have a solution yet to wean ourselves off metallurgical coal because we need steel. Sure. Electric furnaces are coming, but there's, you know, what, 3 to 5% of the world's steel comes from electric furnaces. It's a huge, I mean, we're a long way from getting off coal. So we got to mine it responsibly. We got to mine everything responsibly. Nobody talks about that kind of stuff. Sure. So I don't think you could do a marketing program. I think it's kind of got to be a little bit here, a little bit there. I think improving social performance, in social, publishing good social performance in media. I think governments have a role to play here because they kind of set the tone, right? Like IFC, World Economic Forum, those bodies, they have mining groups, and they exist to make sure that the money that's tied to mining development in developing countries gets done the right way so that we don't have these problems. They're doing a good job, but I think we have a long journey on that to go. And I don't think there's an easy answer because I don't think you can throw money at this one. I think it's got to be a grassroots over time. And to me, having, one of the things that's going to be interesting to me is when the lights finally come on with governments around critical materials and supply chain security as a national security issue, because there's going to be a shortage of these metals. It's going to happen. I think there's an opportunity there when, the European bloc and some of these blocs look at securing their own metal supply chain. When that comes into prominence, there's a real opportunity there to change the dialogue around mining in society. But I kind of think we need to have the aha moment of where are these metals going to come from? I'm working on an article, like a thought leadership series for like external content development, and it's the series of the articles is around mining's I think it's called Mining's Transition Towards a Clean Energy Future. And these are kind of all elements in there for the discussion. I mean, it gets very tactical too, but there's some big things coming, I think.
And so let me understand, you're putting together a content series on behalf of Black & Veatch, I guess, that you guys will publish. Is that okay?
Yeah, it's to me, it's part of the thought leadership. I mean, part of the, I don't think contractors should just be sitting out waiting for RFPs to come over the fence. And I don't think really anybody in a leadership role in a tier 1 company thinks like that either. So I think part of the job needs to be, staying ahead of what's going on and being able, staying current with what's going on, evaluating the trends, and being in a position to support our customers with that advanced thinking. Understand what's going on in the marketplace. Like, for example, like we talked about, there's emerging technologies in the water space. There's emerging technologies in digital analytics, energy management. We need to be, as contractors and consultants, engaging in that broad technology spectrum to make sure that we're in a position to understand where these technologies are in their life cycle. Are they R&D? Are they bench? Are they emerging? Are they deployable? Are they ready for pilots? How much do they cost? Do they have financial strength? Do they need investment? How to work with them to leverage that into the mining space, because the miners, some of them have the capacity to be analyzing that landscape, but a lot of them don't. So we as consultants need to be forward thinking, analyzing that landscape, and being prepared to work with a miner to help them best apply it. So to me, that's all this advanced. This is what R&D to me looks like in a consulting company. We need to be putting that energy in and being able to help our clients navigate through that, because it's a very complex spectrum of technologies, and not just in mining. You got to look at cross industry technologies. So to me, that's what we need to be doing, and we should be sharing our views through thought leadership in an open forum. That's my philosophy. That's what we're doing at Black & Veatch.
No, and we're doing the same thing at Prime Contract Solutions. There's no question. I mean, I think for us, being on the leading edge allows us the opportunity to take that information back to our clients and say, hey, guess what? Did you know this was going on? This is something worth looking at. This is something worth considering, because their focus is different. You know, let's be honest, their focus is different. So I think that's a great initiative, Jim, and one that I agree with and support. So good for you guys.
Yeah, thanks. And you know, maybe just an ending thought, Jason, about the aspirational question. I think more than ever, we've talked about innovation, collaboration, partnering as key things that really need to happen more. But just maybe going back on the partnering aspect, it's tough to partner because the egos get in the way, and then there's always a contract involved, and as well as anybody, you got to get the contracting right because it drives all the behaviors on everything.
Right.
But what I really hope we can do is we can have improved trust levels between owners and contractors, and I know that can be tough sometimes because sometimes there's performance issues. I mean, nobody's perfect.
Right.
I'm a big believer in sponsorship to make sure that a relationship exists at the highest level with your client partner, so that you can have an open dialogue about performance and get that feedback in a timely way so that you can address it and provide real-time coaching and feedback so there's continuous performance improvement. Our clients, mining clients, have complex staging gate procedures. They're tweaking them a lot of the time, although I think they've kind of settled down now. There's a lot of guidance material out there that does need to get understood and applied. Every miner's different. So there's a big learning curve to working with the new client on both sides, right? A client needs to learn how to work with a contractor, vice versa. So the more we can have trust in that relationship and realize that, the contractors want a long-term repeat business relationships. I mean, tier ones especially, we want that. We will invest the time to build relationships, learn procedures, learn guidelines, work processes, all those things, so that we can be repetitive and consistent with high quality, safe performance every time. And the more that we have trust in that relationship, it makes it easier to apply, so like it's our job to be experts in applied technology in the spaces we're dealing with. If we have a higher trust relationship, we can work earlier with them at like FEL1 and provide good advice. And it doesn't have to be paid advice all the time. It could be, we can have a conversation about it. But I think if we can have a higher level of trust, and that has to be earned on both sides and worked on both sides, I think that's a real opportunity area.
Totally agree. The theme that comes up every single time we do a roundtable discussion and we start picking apart an issue, the underlying theme in every case is trust. And how do you build trust? How do you sustain trust? How do you go about doing that? And I think it's a really interesting topic, and I think that there are things that we can do, but it's super key. So I totally agree with you.
Yeah, I think it starts at the top. The behaviors start at the top, and they have to be demonstrated. You have to walk the talk. But yeah, that's probably a big opportunity area going forward.
No,
I think honestly, we're seeing an increased desire with our clients to put in place, MSAs, a master service or general service agreement, to allow easy access to SMEs in these developing areas. That pendulum swings. I think it's swinging back towards, let's get MSA in place with quality providers who can provide that subject matter expertise, and globally would be preferential, but in pockets where it can add a lot of value, like especially decarbonization. We all have to work together on decarbonization. That's not an area where somebody can just be the go-to contractor for that. And same thing with water, same thing with the digital analytics, all these evolving spaces.